Our presentation will be on the main features of Mali political practice and ceremony according to Ibn Battuta's journey. We're first going to look at some background on Ibn Battuta, then look at the adoption of Islam in Mali, then look at the importance of social structure, and finally focus on the importance of material items such as literature and music. Now let's go ahead and look at some background on Ibn Battuta. Now, Ibn Battuta was lesser known outside of the Arab world, but he was a traveler and a scholar in the lands of Asia and Africa. But more specifically, and what we're going to be focusing on today, he traveled through the lands of Mali in sub-Saharan Africa. And he provided information throughout the 1300s in the 14th century on the Muslim world that we still use today when learning about these cultures. According to the Indiana University, Ibn Battuta's main reason to travel was to go on a hajj, or a pilgrimage to Mecca, as all good Muslims want to do. But his traveling went on for about 29 years, and he covered about 75,000 miles, visiting the equivalent of 44 modern countries. Throughout Ibn Battuta's travels in Mali, Battuta gained important knowledge about traditional political practices and ceremonial practices across the region. But more specifically, he learned about the adaptation of Islam, the importance of social structure and hierarchy, and the significance and importance of material items and music in the Mali culture. Now, Islam was very important to the Mali kingdom, and they adapted Islam into their Mandingo culture, but they did make certain exceptions to fit their own culture traditions into their religion. So specifically, in one instance, Battuta at a ceremony met Sultan Mansa Suleiman of Mali in order to honor Mansa Suleiman and the other former Sultan of Morocco. The reading of the Quran was incorporated into the ceremony as a sign of respect between the Islamic brethren, so it was important enough to incorporate it to the Mali people. Later on, Battuta expressed how Mali people were very observant of the hours of prayer and saw the importance of attending congregations, being mindful to bring their children to. If one didn't arrive early at the mosque on Islam's holy day of Friday, usually one wouldn't be able to find a seat. Now this just shows the popularity and importance of Islam in the Kingdom of Mali. Unlike the people of Mali, Battuta considered it a bad quality that the Mali ate dogs and donkeys. Similarly to pork, these animals are considered untouchable and are not to be consumed while following the teachings of Islam. Another contradictory quality among the Mali was the practice of not wearing clothing. Some women even included servants, slaves, young girls, and even the Sultan's daughter did not wear clothing. Not wearing clothing is offensive in Islamic culture, as women are expected to cover certain parts of their body in order to respect the teachings of Allah and the reputation of their family. The writing we have depicted here is the word Islam in Arabic. The second point we'll be covering is the importance of social structure. Now, all members of society in Mali participated in events, both political and ceremonial, including the Sultan and the Qadi, who were judges, commanders, translators, doctors, servants, and slaves. Previously mentioned, Battuta was invited to a ceremony honoring the former Moroccan Sultan and Sultan Mansa Suleiman. During the ceremony, commanders, Qadi, and doctors were invited to participate as they were considered elite. After witnessing two events, Battuta noticed Mansa Suleiman was always in the company of others, such as commanders, admirers, or armed bearers. Like Mansa Suleiman Duga, a translator was in the company of others during these events. The lesser in society, his 4 wives, and 100 of his slaves. Now, Battuta saw that there was a specific orderly structure in each of these events through these past observations. Every Friday after the Asr prayer, Battuta noticed that there would be a scheduled ceremony Duga performed due to his high status. During it, Mansa Suleiman presented a gift to Duga, Battuta wrote the gift was a bag of gold dust. Now, Duga then announced what the gift was, then commanders thanked the Sultan. The next day, which was Saturday, commanders ended the ceremony by giving Duga a gift according to their specific rank. Next, we'll look at our third point, the importance of material items such as literature and music. Now, some of the most important aspects of Mali culture, according to Ibn Battuta's observations, were food, clothing, literature, and music in ceremony. Food was almost seen as sacred in Mali culture. Ibn Battuta details a grand banquet in which he was offered gifts of even more food after the feast. Quote, "It was 3 cakes of bread, a piece of beef fried in native oil, and a calabash of sour curds." Though Ibn Battuta scoffed at the insignificant gifts, this shows that Mali saw food as Ibn Battuta saw gold, jewels, and riches. In another quote, it states, "A gift of betel is a far greater honor than a gift of gold and silver." Obviously, the Mali people valued the crops they worked hard to grow, in this case, the betel leaves. Mali also celebrated the fast breaking with 2 festivals full of feast days with extravagant weapons of gold, silver, and crystals, and thrush masks with a wooden head with a red beak, music, and poetry. The Mali also practiced the eating of carrion, dogs, and asses, which were seen as taboo in many other cultures even today. Battuta even visited cannibals in Mali who found food more sacred than the rest and believed that the color of one's flesh made one purer and riper. Now, clothing is mentioned many times by Battuta and in a wide variety of fashions, especially in the presence of the Sultan during ceremony and prayer. Mali people saw the addition, or more often, the removal of clothing to be good manners. Some of the clothing noted was, quote, "a gold skull cap with a gold band shaped like knives, a velvet red tunic called mutinfas, beautiful robes, and on their heads golden silver fillets with balls, in their ears large pendants having an opening of half a span, and over his head canopies of colored silk with a golden bird." All of these examples and excerpts from Ibn Battuta's journeys paint a beautiful picture of the importance of material items in Mali culture. The Mali people also had specific rules with clothing, particularly in the presence of the Sultan, as that was their idea of good manners. Now, we have 3 examples displaying this idea. First is, quote, "The person summoned takes off his clothes and puts on worn garments, removes his turban and dons a dirty skull cap, and enters with his garments and trousers raised knee-high." The second, quote, "Women go into the Sultan's presence naked. Then there is their custom of putting dust and ashes on their heads as a mark of respect, and the grotesque ceremonies we have described when the poets recite their verses," end quote. And finally, they wear clean and white garments to the Friday service, end quote. On the left side of the screen, you can see a picture of the Timbuktu manuscripts, or Mali manuscripts, that date back to the 13th century. They are Arabic and the African texts that discuss the city's glorious past. Africa has a rich legacy of written history, contrary to the popular notion that oral traditions alone preserve the continent's heritage. Moving on to the right side of the page, Ibn Battuta also notes Mali's fascination with literature and storytelling a number of times. He says that on Fridays after service, quote, "reading desks were often brought in and the Quran was read through," end quote. Battuta states that the Mali people had, quote, "a zeal for learning the Quran by heart," end quote. He also says that they put their children in chains if they were not memorizing the Quran well. They would not be set free until they had learned it. At festival the Battuta attends, he also finds that poets make up ridiculous as they recite their sermonizing poetry. Now, music is one of the most crucial aspects of the Mali people's political practice, ceremonial practice, and everyday life. They find music in everything, even through weapons and food. Quote, those confirm his words, which they do by plucking the cord of the bow and releasing it with a twang, just as an archer does when shooting an arrow, end quote. In another example, the Sultan is always preceded by his musicians, in which he takes his time, walking slowly in a leisurely fashion, while his people stand in silence as respect. Some of the instruments that Battuta notes are drums, trumpets, bugles, an instrument made of reeds, some small calabashes at its lower end, and chants of poetry in praise and bows as a compliment. Over the course of Ibn Battuta's travels, he acquired ample amounts of evidence on the practices and traditions, politically and ceremonially, of Mali people. He learned about their adoption of Islam, the significance of social structure, and the importance of material items and music in Mali society. Nearly 700 years later, his experiences are still being shared, and Battuta's knowledge lays a concrete foundation for our understanding of the Mali people today.